Disruptors and Curious Minds. I want to tell you a story. It's
I like a story.
It's 1899. The world's first conference on peace comes together, largely put together by a very unknown man, Russian man, legal scholar, who actually was awarded honorary degrees from Cambridge, from Oxford, from Harvard. He was actually runner-up for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1902. So I think it's probably okay to consider his opinion fairly valid. He actually negotiated the peace terms of the peace treaty in the Russo-Japanese War. So he's done some stuff. So
He's
anyway,
done some stuff. That's a good CV.
I'm not going to tell you his name yet. I'll tell you his name in a minute.
Oh, Jeremy. Could I just ask you a question? What year was that? Did you say at the beginning?
1899. 1899.
So it took humanity until 1899 to have a conference on peace. What were we doing for the other 400,000 years?
Us versus them. We were racing to beat each other at whatever the cost, unfortunately.
I wonder when the word peace first appeared and emerged, because having the first peace conference in 1899 seems like it should have been much sooner than that. Anyway.
Okay, so this gentleman's name, Fyodor Martens. All right, Fyodor Martens. And, imagine it's 1899. Everyone's together, all the countries in the world, in this room for 2 weeks or more, trying to figure out what's permittable in the rules of war. What is allowable from an international perspective on war. After weeks of debate, they're close. They have 54 articles. And everything's kind of working out. We're getting to a spot where everyone's agreeing. And then at one point, one of the smaller countries, I believe it was Belgium, stands up and goes, "Hey guys, listen, you big powers are calling the smaller countries or the smaller groups within countries you invade belligerents. We're not belligerents. We're actually defending our own country when you invade us. So we need to change the language in there a little bit." And then the big powers were like, "Yeah, no, I don't think we're going to get on board with that." And the whole conference almost is a waste of time.
Into chaos.
Everyone else grabs their ball and go home. And then Mr. Martens stands up, has an idea, and shares a concept that aligns everybody. And the uniqueness of this concept is that it was vague enough to get everyone to buy in, but also open enough to be universally applicable as we move through the various stages of the world beyond 1899. Let me read this was the preamble that ended up being in the document that came out of that conference in 1899. "Until a more complex code of laws of war is issued, the high contracting parties think it right to declare that in cases not included in the regulations adopted by them, populations and belligerents," there's that word, the Belgians came up and got their word in there, "remain under protection and empire of the principles of international law as they result from the usages established between civilized nations, from the laws of humanity and the requirements of public consciousness." The last bit of that is the important piece, because that's the carryover from the laws of humanity and the requirements of public consciousness. So how does that all shake out? Basically, if it's not spelled out in the rules, we should still consider the laws of humanity, meaning what's right for humans, and the requirements of public consciousness. What is the international community? What do people think about what you did? Okay, great. This sounds like a nice little floaty requirement. Hey, they're not a requirement, but this idea, right? So I did some research, and it's actually been cited in multiple cases in international court, international justice. Number one, the first case.
Hold on. So just so I get my head around this. So basically, if what you're doing isn't written out in legal terminology, word for word, in whatever treaty, document, or memorandum you're using or going by, just because it's not written in there word for word, doesn't mean you can do it. Just because it isn't explicitly illegal, you can't do it because of the rules of humanity, whatever they might be.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So how is it first applied? Not necessarily first applied, but one of the most famous cases in which it was applied. Nuremberg, 45, 46, pretty big conversation.
Pretty big conversation is how
Pretty
you
big
just described
conversation.
the Nuremberg trials.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was like, so Germany was brought to trial, or the Germans were brought to trial to be held accountable for their actions. And basically what happened was the Germans were saying there wasn't a law specifically against their approach to killing millions of people, putting them in concentration camps, all the terrible things that were done in that war. And there's a reference in Pepperdine Law. There's a study that I found, the development of international law related to crimes against humanity. It references that the Nuremberg trials referenced the Martens Clause to hold the Germans accountable. It wasn't the end all be all, I don't think, that drove the decision of those trials, but it definitely was cited as something super important and something to kind of lean on as a precedent, which was pretty powerful. Another example, a little lesser known example, in 1949, in a place called the Corfu Channel, Albania had to clear mines out of their waters post-war to clear shipping angles and all of that. British ships were destroyed. Albania was like, yeah, there's nothing in law that says I have to clean the mines out and warn the people after the war. It turns out actually that new mines were placed in this area, but the American Journal of International Law case study, the Martens Clause, Principles of Humanity and Dictates of Public Consciousness, references this and the decision to hold Albania accountable, even though there wasn't legal reasoning or legal precedent for them to clear the mines. It referenced the Martens Clause. This is something that's been referenced a lot in 1986. The last one I'll tell you about, 1986, U.S., Nicaragua, the whole Contras thing. Reagan was in office, and the U.S. actually was mining the Nicaraguan harbors, putting mines in the water. They stood back on the fact, well, we didn't really sign any treaty precluding us from doing that. The Martens Clause was again referenced. So why do I bring up the Martens Clause? Why are we talking about it? I'm thinking on paper. My thought is, what if we dusted this damn thing off and applied it across the board to all the challenges we're having in AI, all the challenges we're having in spacefaring and space tech, and potentially even nefarious uses of other technologies like quantum and some of the other things. So that's why I wanted to have a dialogue about it. And I wanted to share, because I didn't know about it before I started researching it. Did you know about Martens Clause?
I didn't know about Martens Clause. Is the answer to that, my first answer to that is twofold. Firstly, the Nuremberg trials, and to a much lesser extent, the Albania situation in the Corfu Canal. Doesn't take a genius to work out that they were nefarious, evil acts on the first one, and perhaps incompetence on the second one. But you don't need a 300-year-old law to say that that's bollocks. They're guilty. Off with their heads. If you apply that same thought process to much more less obvious situations, it becomes much more difficult to execute on. And also, what are the laws of humanity? Again, the same thing. I mean, the laws of humanity for, you shouldn't freaking gas millions of people, but the same laws of humanity don't apply to, can I build a hotel on the moon or not? Or who does this asteroid belong to?
Good thoughts. Good thoughts. Well,
They're my thoughts.
So, yes, I mean, you and I, individuals, people can think about the atrocities that have happened in war and point back to them and go, man, that's terrible. Like, that's terrible, and those people should be held accountable. But when you have international organizations, and you thought like just states and cities are bureaucratic, you think about the levels of bureaucracy when you have multiple companies or multiple countries organizing together and trying to figure out how to put something out. You do have to have stuff to point to, and you do have to have reference points in this case. So I think it'd be interesting to consider and lean on it. the space tech piece, I think we can jump around a little bit, like between space tech and, well, let's start with space tech. The only thing out there governing space is the Outer Space Treaty, which was done in what, the 60s or the 70s. And just this idea of like space for all mankind was this just ethos, this idea. And it could be the Martens Clause to me is a potential architecture. It's potential infrastructure to jump off of and call it kind of the minimum viable requirements for anything. Think about a car, right? Think about a car. You have a car.
Is it a flying car?
It could be anything, man. It could be a flying car, it'd be a submarine car, whatever you want, Mark. But the minimum viable requirements, from that are out there is like whoever's driving and operating the car, there needs to be a seatbelt in there. There needs to be some airbags. There needs to be a crumple zone. There needs to be safety mechanisms that are in place for that. Could this be kind of this minimum viable architecture when applied to space to really point back to and say, hey, Mark, I know you're doing all these great things, and I know there's investment that's required to support those things, and you're accountable to your investors, but could we have that Martens Clause woven in to your operational procedures? Would you be willing to?
What's the alternative? The 4 Stoic virtues, or you put it in human language, don't be an asshole. Like, doesn't the Martens Clause essentially mean don't be an asshole? Like,
pretty much.
Like you can wrap it up in all of the bureaucratic legal language you want, and you can have as many footnotes as you like. But it boils down to don't be an asshole, and we can all genuinely agree on what that is, and don't be that. But it's even that seems that's easy to do in certain situations, but not in others. So yeah, to give it a legal framework, a minimum viable. What did you call it? A
minimum viable architecture. Yeah,
MVA.
So all right, so define what's an asshole as applied to a human.
Well, that's the problem with the Martens Clause, isn't it? So it's on the one end of the spectrum. Yeah, you have Nazi Germany. And then lower down that scale, you have what happened in the Corfu Straits. And then, at what point are they just being a bit idiotic and not being an asshole? I don't know the answer to that.
You know what we need to do? Here's my ask. All right. If anyone knows Tyler Cowan, I want to have him on the show, and I want to ask him about the possibility. What does society look like if we use the Martens Clause as a minimum viable architecture for human flourishing and survival? Boom.
Well, I think that we should ask Yuval Noah Harari that same question, since we're on a social media rampage to get Yuval. Yuval, what do you know about the Martens Clause, and how could that be incorporated into the AI, the US particularly AI military machine? I'm sure you've read the memorandum from the Department of War putting America on a war footing and an AI first military ambition. It's a race against China, as you know. If there are no humans in the loop, how can you have a humanity clause?
Really good question.
Moving from space to AI, jumping around. So yeah, okay. So we spoke about the AI military machine. Yeah. Could you just read the Martens Clause again, just so I have it at top of mind?
Yeah, let me pull up a kind of a paraphrase of it, because the language in 1899 is written for people in 1899. Over the
Let's
years,
not shy away from the language. This is Shakespeare. This is the land of Shakespeare.
Fair enough. Would you like me to reread the version? It's kind of long though. Basically, in a nutshell, if it's not covered by law, populations and belligerents remain under the protection of the principles of international law, number one, the laws of humanity, and the dictates of public consciousness. All of those things, international law is like consensus, right? It's everyone agreeing that, this is right or this is wrong. You have people on polar opposites of that believe something is 100% right, where another person will believe it's 100% wrong. You've got some people in the middle of that. Then the laws of humanity and laws of public consciousness are a little bit different. As it relates to AI, the safety mechanism for the car thing, is probably more applicable to the AI case than it is to the space case. But, we talk about Dario Amodei leaving OpenAI because of not agreeing with the safety programs, even though he was in charge of the safety programs. I guess what he was trying to put in over there wasn't accepted. It was speed first, and he left and is doing his own thing. Now stepping up and stepping out against the U.S. government a little bit, although I think he's walking some of that stuff back just a touch. The safety mechanism, we all have to agree on what the safety mechanisms are for AI. And it's not AI ethics. AI ethics gets blown. AI ethics is a topic that people glaze over because it's talked about a lot, but there's not really anything, I think, at the meat of it. It's like, what are we building? How is it built? How is it going to serve humanity? How does it have the potential to hurt humanity? And what can we do as a society to make sure the second piece of that doesn't outweigh the first piece of that?
As an aside, I just very quickly, I typed into Claude, is there a modern day equivalent of the Martens Law in international relations? And then it goes through a few examples, exactly as you did. This is the AI thinking like a human. But then there's a bit, it says, applied to new technologies. One of the most relevant modern applications is to emerging warfare technologies. In the absence of clear international treaty norms governing the use of new technologies in military operations and information warfare, the question arises as to whether it is necessary to apply the Martens Clause to unregulated situations of modern armed conflict. This is actively debated in discussions about autonomous weapons, cyber warfare, and AI-guided systems. You're ahead of the game, Jeremy. You should be leading the conversation out there. You should be on the BBC or the NBC or ABC telling the world about this.
Well, let's talk through it. Let's talk through it a little bit. All right. So if we were to take the Martens Clause as minimum viable architecture in the case of making sure AI doesn't do the wrong shit, right? So let's think about like the accountability chain of that, because there's
something not explicitly prohibited is not automatically permitted.
Sorry. Okay, there you go. Little Martens Clause simplification. I like that. So accountability. There's no Martens Clause police. There's no police station that has Martens Clause badges on it, right? But let's talk about who would be accountable.
Well, isn't protect and serve a little bit? That's the wording of the Martens Clause in a roundabout way. I mean, protect and serve, it can be. No, okay, sorry, go on.
Maybe, I don't know. It's another vague line, rally cry kind of thing. But no, let's think about it. All right, so you have the technology companies that are making the technology. In order for technology to be deployed, I think you have to explain the technology enough to write laws around it. Here's the problem, and here's where the Martens Clause, I think, could be interestingly applicable. Tech moves faster, especially now. Tech moves faster than our ability to understand it and write laws around it to protect ourselves from it. It's not even a fair race how far off tech is from our ability to govern it. So what if we put in a situation where all new technologies has to be explained well enough. We have to understand it well enough. And this is where the tech companies are going to push back, because it's like, hey, I spent 10 or 15 years developing this technology. If I tell you how it works, then everyone else will be able to do it. Okay. I agree with that for smaller things, but this is AI. This is a different technology, I think, that is important enough to really understand. Now, Mark, hang with me here, man, because I know
I'm hanging.
The reality of this coming together is highly unlikely, but I'm going to push this anyway, right? You have this requirement that before a technology is deployed, it has to be presented related to AI, has to be presented well enough to understand how it was put together, why it was put together, and how it actually works top to bottom. Number two, who eventually chose in that company to deploy that technology? Here's the interesting accountability piece. Tagging those deployments with a lead, maybe it's the CEO, similar to bank statements, similar to all kinds of verifications that CEOs have to make. Someone had to push the button to say, let's run with this. And whoever that person is ultimately accountable to any negligible effects of it. Number three, the government. Okay. So you have the tech companies, you have the people leading the tech companies, you have the government. So
So like the tech CEOs and the government all being held accountable since time immemorial.
totally. And like I know this is
I
highly
know.
unrealistic, right? Government, okay, are there laws in place to defend, to uphold the laws of humanity, to uphold the, what was it? Public conscious, God, I can't think of it now. Yeah, public consciousness, dictates of public consciousness and laws of humanity. So were there laws put in place to protect humanity, to account for the dictates of public consciousness? Were those turned into laws that apply to this technology? If not, why not? And who didn't allow that law to come to bear? If they didn't, they're accountable. The last piece of this, Mark, is there's got to be this third party. It's got to be this third party to basically be guided just by the principles of the Martens Clause. And that third party, maybe it's a Martens tribunal or something. I don't know what the hell. But they actually view these instances and police them. Maybe the International Criminal Court, I think ICC has used this stuff before. But anyway, that's what I'm thinking. Highly unlikely, but it could be an interesting anchor for people who really wanted to fix shit instead of perpetuate and accelerate the wrong stuff.
This is good a framing as I've heard of something has to be done. What about the black box of AI though? So you said, okay, you have to explain how it's done. Everyone knows that the black box of AI, that they don't actually know how it does a lot of the things that it does. How do you account for that?
I think part of the accountability is like, how was it trained? What was it trained on? What did those interactions look like? I think there's a, God, I wish I
Well, it's
had
like
this.
A plus something equals C, and they don't know what that something is, but they know that it gets to C, and they know what A is. It's the input data, but that little magic ding 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 that happens, they can't explain that. Here's another pushback for you. Say that they're talking about fusion, which, as we know from one of our former guests, is just an engineering problem. So when fusion eventually comes to market, and the CEO of Helion is explaining to the court, to the International Tribunal in The Hague, how it works, they've got no idea what he's talking about. How can they make any kind of informed decisions about the inherent goodness or badness of any tech?
Yeah.
So you'd have
And
to get the CEOs, you have to get their friend CEOs into the thing. You'd have to all be self-ticking themselves off, wouldn't they?
yeah, either that or there's got to be incentive to get wicked smart people on the other
Yeah.
side. Unfortunately, people on the other side are probably not going to get those, billion-dollar payouts, right?
How
But
do you get wicked smart people out of big tech and into more humanitarian first projects?
geez, man, I think it's this is tricky. This is tricky. I'm gonna ramble through this a little bit and see what happens. But
Hold on, before that, Yuval, how do we get what did I say? I can't even remember. Yuval, how do you answer that question? Sorry.
no, there's conditioning in us, Mark. There's conditioning of and a competitiveness that is it's a me versus you versus an us connected thing. And if there's it all probably started out back when my tribe was running through the woods and your tribe was running through the woods, and there was a deer in the middle of us, and my people were starving, your people were starving. I needed the deer, you needed the deer. Instead of us working together and feeding both of our tribes, I wanted to get it, you wanted to get it, right? And that conditioning is pervasive in through our upbringing versus the collaborative nature. And it's so interesting. This is the Yuval thing too. Our success over time as humans is a result of our communication and our collaboration. That's how we moved up the food chain over the years. But now that equally could be our, instead of being collaborative, we're competitive. And competitive is not bad necessarily, but competitive for an us versus them, it's ingrained in us, Mark, is what I'm trying to say. And to release that connection, that ingrained thing in our brain is difficult because guess what? If it's in our brain, it's our thought, it becomes part of us. If it's part of us, it's hard to change because us can't be wrong. Ego comes in and on and on and on.
Do you know what I think would do it? I think maybe two things would do it. One, a giant meteorite impact. The other, aliens landing on the lawns of Buckingham Palace. I think you need something on that level to reset the human condition. I don't think any amount of bottom-up education, cultural conditioning has the power to change it.
Well, that's the thing. Like humans are good at coming together when something epically catastrophic happens. But there's what is that, an apex?
Are they the same when it's epically awesome? Like people are good at coming together when it's epically catastrophic. And we're good at coming together when it's epically awesome. You remember the best parties of your life, the best celebrations of your life. Everyone's together and because it's freaking awesome. So maybe we need to create more incredible moments. The aliens could do that one, but then beyond that. So I take back my cynical response.
Or we figure out how to cascade and connect the energy of those moments, right? Because we come up and come down, the moment's over. The aliens, we work out the whole alien thing. They get off Buckingham Palace's lawn. Everyone's back and safe again. And now it's time to, get into races of me beating you at stuff. It's hard stuff, dude. We're thinking on paper live. We're learning.
Maybe we were always safe, but because we handed over control of the military machine to an AI that makes that snap judgment call that in fact they're bad aliens, they have bad intent. Let's shoot first because this is an AI first. We're in a race to China. We got to shoot them before the Chinese shoot them, and that.
Jeez, nothing. Nothing simple in these discussion forums. But there you have it. That's the Martens Clause. Look it up. Check it out on your own. Consider it as a minimum viable architecture for human flourishing.
Love it. And we can all flourish together. We can all flourish on next week's show. Until then, be disruptive. Stay curious.
Keep thinking on paper.